What avoidable drowning at the community pool happened while lifeguards were on their phones filming TikToks? My son Liam drowned at Riverside Community Pool on a Thursday afternoon in June, while 3 lifeguards stood within 30 feet of him filming a choreographed dance routine for social media. I found him floating face down in the shallow end at 3:18 p.m. He'd been underwater for at least 4 minutes, based on the timestamp from security footage I'd see later. 4 minutes, while teenage lifeguards in red swimsuits laughed and recorded themselves doing synchronized moves to some trending song. 4 minutes while I sat on a bench 20 yards away, responding to a work email my boss said was urgent. 4 minutes that took my 8-year-old son from me forever. The pool had been packed that day because it was the first really hot week of summer and school had just let out. Maybe 200 people splashing around in the main pool and the kiddie area. I'd brought Liam there after picking him up from day camp because he'd been begging to swim all week. We'd gone through our usual routine, applied sunscreen twice, made him wait 30 minutes after his snack before getting in the water, reminded him about the buddy system and staying in the shallow end since he was still working on his swimming skills. He'd nodded seriously at everything and promised to be careful. Then he'd run off toward the pool in his blue swim trunks with the shark pattern, while I found a bench with shade and pulled out my laptop to finish the client presentation my boss needed by end of day. I'd looked up every few minutes to check on him, saw him splashing near the steps, saw him playing with some other kids, saw him dunking under and popping back up. Everything seemed fine, normal, safe. The lifeguards were visible in their elevated chairs scattered around the pool perimeter. The whole facility had been recently renovated with new safety features and updated equipment. Multiple signs everywhere about pool rules and lifeguard authority. The place felt secure, professional, trustworthy. I'd been a member for 3 years without incident. Liam had taken swimming lessons there last summer with an instructor who'd praised his progress. This was our safe space, our summer tradition. The community hub where families gathered and kids learned to swim and parents could relax knowing trained professionals were watching. Except nobody was watching. Not when it mattered. Not when my son got tired in water that was 4 feet deep and tried to grab the pool edge but missed and went under instead of calling for help because he'd been taught not to make noise and bother people. Not when he flailed weakly before going still because his 8-year-old body gave up fighting for air. Not when he floated there motionless, while lifeguards 20 feet away held their phones high and grinned at the camera. My phone buzzed with another email, and I glanced at it quickly before looking up to find Liam again. Scanned the shallow end. Didn't see his blue trunks or his blonde hair. Figured he'd moved to the steps or gone to the bathroom. Went back to typing for maybe 2 more minutes before something made me stand up. Parent instinct. That feeling when something's wrong even though you can't explain why. I walked toward the pool, scanning the water more carefully now. Saw dozens of kids, but not mine. Started walking faster. That's when I saw him. Floating face down near the far edge of the shallow section, his arms spread out, his body completely still. I was running before my brain fully processed what I was seeing, dropped my laptop on the concrete, screamed his name, jumped into the water fully clothed, and grabbed him, pulled him to the edge while yelling for help, for a lifeguard, for anyone. His lips were blue. His eyes were half open and glassy. His skin was cold, despite the warm water. I lifted him onto the deck and started CPR because I'd taken a certification course 5 years ago when he was born. Tilted his head back, checked his airway, started compressions. People were screaming now, crowding around. Someone finally yelled for a lifeguard. One of them came running over. A girl maybe 19 with her phone still in her hand. She dropped it and took over compressions while her supervisor called 911. But it was too late. I could feel it. Could see it in the way his body lay there unresponsive. Could sense it in the horrible silence of his chest not rising. Could know it in my bones even as I begged him to breathe and come back and not leave me. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They worked on him for 20 minutes right there on the pool deck while I stood there dripping and shaking. They got his heart beating again. Loaded him into the ambulance. I rode with them to County General while they bagged him and pushed medications and radioed ahead. The ER team was waiting. They took him straight back. A nurse made me sit in the waiting room. I called my wife Jessica from the hallway. Told her what happened. She was at work downtown and said she'd leave immediately. I sat in a plastic chair with pool water still dripping from my clothes and waited. Doctors came out every 30 minutes with updates. They'd stabilized him. His heart was beating, but there was no brain activity. The drowning had lasted too long. His brain had been without oxygen for at least 4 minutes plus, however long it took to restart his heart. They'd put him on a ventilator and moved him to the ICU. Jessica arrived and we sat together in his room, watching machines breathe for him while his chest rose and fell mechanically. The attending physician was kind but direct. She explained that Liam had suffered severe anoxic brain injury, that the scans showed extensive damage, that even if he survived, he would never wake up, never speak, never recognize us. She said we should start thinking about what we wanted to do, what Liam would have wanted. I couldn't process her words, couldn't accept them, couldn't believe that 2 hours ago my son had been excited about swimming, and now he was gone even though his body was still technically alive. The hospital kept him stable for 3 days while we sat there frozen. Jessica and I took turns holding his hand and talking to him and playing his favorite music even though the doctors said he couldn't hear us. Family came. Friends came. They brought food we couldn't eat and said things that didn't matter. On the 3rd day, the neurologist showed us the latest scans, explained again that there was no hope, that we were keeping his body alive, but Liam was already gone. We made the decision to remove life support that afternoon, held him while the ventilator was disconnected, watched him stop breathing, felt him go cold, signed papers, made arrangements, went home to an empty house that still had his swim trunks hanging on the bathroom door. I spent that first night sitting on his bed, holding his stuffed shark, and trying to understand how this had happened. How a community pool with trained lifeguards and safety protocols and regular inspections had let my son drown in 4 feet of water. I pulled up the pool's website on my phone, read their safety mission statement, saw photos of smiling lifeguards and happy families, saw certifications and accreditations, saw testimonials about what a great place it was. None of it meant anything. None of it had saved Liam. The funeral was on a Saturday. More than 300 people came, his classmates, his teachers, his soccer team. The casket was so small. We'd picked out his favorite shirt with the dinosaurs on it. Jessica could barely stand. I felt numb, disconnected. People kept saying he was in a better place now, that God had a plan, that time would heal. Every word felt like glass in my ears. After everyone left, I sat in the cemetery alone until the groundskeeper said they were closing. Drove home in silence. Found Jessica sitting in Liam's room staring at nothing. We didn't talk about what happened next because we couldn't. Couldn't think past the next hour, the next breath, the next moment of existing in a world where our son didn't. Monday morning, I received an email from the pool's insurance company. A claim adjuster named Richard Strauss wanted to schedule an interview about the incident, wanted to understand the circumstances, wanted my statement. The tone was professional, but something about it felt wrong, like they were already building a defense instead of taking responsibility. I called a lawyer, found someone named Diane Kapoor, who specialized in wrongful death and personal injury cases. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Diane's office was downtown in a mid-rise building with worn carpeting. She listened to everything without interrupting, took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she sat back and asked a question that made my stomach turn. Had I been watching Liam the entire time at the pool? I said no. I'd been working on my laptop. She wrote that down. Asked how often I'd looked up to check on him. I said every few minutes. She asked if I'd noticed the lifeguards being distracted. I said I hadn't really paid attention to them. I'd assumed they were doing their jobs. She nodded slowly and said we had a case, but it would be complicated. The pool would try to claim I was negligent for not watching my son. They'd say parents were responsible for supervising their own children. They'd argue the lifeguards were there for emergencies, but couldn't watch every individual swimmer constantly. She said we'd need to prove gross negligence, prove they'd failed their duty of care so badly that they were liable despite my presence. She asked if I wanted her to investigate. I said yes. She said her fee was 40% of any settlement or judgment, but she wouldn't charge anything up front. We shook hands. I left feeling like I'd just entered a war I didn't understand. Diane called me 3 days later. Her investigator had gone to the pool and talked to people who'd been there that day. Multiple witnesses confirmed that the lifeguards had been on their phones constantly. Several mentioned seeing them recording videos. One woman said she'd complained to the front desk about it an hour before Liam drowned and been told the staff would be reminded of the rules. Diane had also filed a public records request for the security footage from the pool. The city was legally required to provide it within 10 business days. She'd also sent a preservation letter to the pool demanding they save all employee records, training documents, incident reports, and phone data. I asked what phone data meant. She said if the lifeguards had been using their personal phones on duty, we could subpoena those records, could prove exactly what they were doing when Liam died. I asked if she thought we'd win. She said cases like this were unpredictable. Juries sympathized with parents who lost children, but they also looked for someone to blame. The defense would paint me as a distracted father who was more focused on work than his son. They'd say Liam drowned because I wasn't watching him, not because lifeguards weren't doing their jobs. She said we needed the video footage, needed proof that was so damning it couldn't be explained away. The security footage arrived 8 days later. Diane called me to her office to watch it. She'd set up a laptop in her conference room, warned me that it would be difficult to see. Asked if I was sure I wanted to watch. I said yes. She pressed play. The video was from a camera mounted high on the pool building overlooking most of the main pool area. The timestamp showed 3:14 p.m., 4 minutes before I found Liam. The footage was color, but slightly grainy. I could see the crowded pool, kids playing, adults lounging, 3 lifeguard stands visible in the frame. One had a male lifeguard who looked college-aged. The other 2 had female lifeguards who looked like teenagers. All 3 had their phones out. The male was scrolling. One female was taking selfies. The other was holding her phone high, filming something. At 3:15, 2 of them climbed down from their stands and met near the shallow end. Started positioning themselves. The third joined them. They were all smiling, laughing. One counted down on her fingers. Then they all started dancing, moving in sync, doing some choreographed routine. Their phones were propped on a nearby chair pointed at them. They went through the routine twice, making mistakes, laughing, doing it again. During this time, I could see in the background a small figure in blue swim trunks. Liam. He was splashing near the edge. At 3:16, he tried to grab the side, but his hand slipped. He went under, came back up briefly, went under again, didn't come back up. The lifeguards kept dancing, kept filming. At 3:18, I entered the frame running, jumped in, pulled him out, started CPR. The lifeguards noticed then. One ran over, but Liam had been underwater for at least 2 full minutes by that point. Maybe longer if he'd struggled before the camera caught him going down. I watched Diane pause the video. My hands were shaking. My vision was blurred. Diane said quietly that this was the evidence we needed. This proved gross negligence, proved the lifeguards had completely abandoned their posts to film content for social media. She said any jury who saw this would rule in our favor. She said we could also pursue criminal charges, that what happened could constitute criminally negligent homicide, that the lifeguards and potentially their supervisor could face jail time. I asked what happened next. She said she'd draft a demand letter to the pool's insurance company. She'd include stills from the video showing the lifeguards dancing while Liam drowned. She'd demand a 7-figure settlement. If they refused, we'd file a lawsuit. She'd also contact the district attorney about criminal prosecution. She said this case was going to make news. That the video would inevitably become public. That I should prepare for media attention. I said I didn't care about media attention. I cared about making sure what happened to Liam never happened to anyone else. Making sure those lifeguards and whoever hired them and whoever supervised them faced consequences. Diane said we'd make that happen. Guaranteed. The demand letter went out the next day. The insurance company responded within a week with an offer of $50,000. Diane called me furious. Said that was an insult, that they were hoping we'd take quick money and go away. She said we were filing suit immediately. The lawsuit was filed in County Superior Court 2 days later. Liam Garrett v. Riverside Community Pool, City of Riverside, and does 1-10. We were suing the pool, the city that owned it, and placeholder defendants until we identified everyone involved. The complaint detailed everything: the drowning, the lifeguards filming TikToks, The security footage. We attached stills from the video showing the lifeguards dancing with Liam, visible underwater in the background. Diane sent the complaint to every news outlet in the county. By evening, it was the lead story on 3 local news stations. They showed the still images blurred enough to be respectful but clear enough to show what had happened. Reporters called my phone, knocked on my door. I didn't answer. Jessica and I stayed inside and watched the coverage. The public response was immediate and intense. People were outraged, commenting on news articles, sharing the story, demanding accountability. The lifeguards were identified on social media within hours. Their TikTok accounts found. Screenshots of their videos spread everywhere, some of them filmed at the pool in their uniforms. The next morning, the city held a press conference. The mayor stood at a podium with the police chief and the parks and recreation director. He called what happened a tragedy, said an investigation was underway, said the 3 lifeguards had been placed on administrative leave, said the pool would be closed temporarily for safety review, said the city took its responsibility seriously. He didn't apologize, didn't admit fault, didn't mention Liam by name. The press conference made me sick. Diane said it was calculated. They were trying to look responsive without admitting liability, trying to control the narrative. She said we needed to keep pressure on them. I agreed to do a television interview. Went on the local evening news that night. The anchor asked me to describe what happened. I walked through the timeline, finding Liam, the CPR, the hospital, the decision to remove life support. I talked about him, about his love of dinosaurs and sharks, about his laugh, about how he'd wanted to be a marine biologist, about how he'd been excited to swim that day, about how he'd trusted that he was safe. The anchor asked what I wanted to happen now. I said I wanted justice, wanted the lifeguards charged with crimes, wanted the city to fire everyone who'd allowed this to happen, wanted systemic changes so no other parent had to bury their child because teenagers were more focused on going viral than doing their jobs. The interview went viral itself. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People saying they'd never let their kids swim at public pools again, saying lifeguards everywhere needed to have their phones confiscated, saying the 3 lifeguards should go to prison. Some comments blamed me for not watching Liam closely enough, said I was trying to profit from my own negligence, said real parents don't work while their kids swim. Those comments cut deep because part of me agreed. Part of me knew I should have been watching every second, should have ignored the work email, should have protected him better. Diane said that guilt was normal, but misplaced. Said even if I'd been staring at him constantly, I couldn't have watched every moment. Said that's literally why pools employ lifeguards. Said I'd done nothing wrong and the city's lawyers were going to try to make me believe otherwise. She was right. The city's response to our lawsuit came 3 weeks later. They denied all liability, claimed contributory negligence on my part for failing to supervise Liam adequately, claimed assumption of risk because I'd signed a membership agreement that said parents were responsible for their children, claimed governmental immunity for the city, claimed the lifeguards were acting outside the scope of their employment when they filmed videos. The legal maneuvering was designed to confuse and delay, to make us give up. Diane said we weren't giving up. Discovery began. Diane subpoenaed everything. Employee files for all 3 lifeguards, training records, certification documents, cell phone records, past incident reports. She subpoenaed the pool director and the aquatic supervisor for depositions. She hired an expert in aquatic safety to review the facility and the lifeguard protocols. The expert's report came back devastating. It documented multiple safety violations. Lifeguard chairs positioned in dead zones where parts of the pool weren't visible. Inadequate break schedules that led to fatigue. No prohibition on personal phones despite industry standards. No supervisor on deck during operating hours. Certification documents that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Incident reports showing 3 other near drownings in the previous 2 summers that had been labeled as resolved with no disciplinary action. The expert concluded that the drowning was entirely preventable and resulted from systematic failures at every level. Diane scheduled the lifeguards for depositions. The first one was Ashley Pruitt, 19, the one who'd been filming the TikTok. She arrived with her attorney, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit. Diane put her under oath and started asking questions. Had she been filming a video when Liam drowned? Yes. Had she left her lifeguard chair to do so? Yes. Did she know that was against protocol? She hesitated. Her attorney whispered something. She said she'd seen other lifeguards do it. Had her supervisor ever told her not to? No. Had she received training about scanning zones and recognizing distressed swimmers? Yes. Had she been scanning her zone when the video was being filmed? No. The deposition went on for 3 hours. By the end, Ashley was crying. The second lifeguard, Marcus Dunn, 20, was more defensive. He admitted filming, but said he'd only been off his chair for 2 minutes. Said it wasn't his zone where Liam drowned. Said he couldn't have seen him from his angle anyway. Said the whole thing was a tragic accident, but not his fault. He claimed his training had been minimal, that he'd been hired at the start of summer with just a weekend certification course, that nobody had ever enforced phone policies, that the supervisor was rarely on deck, that they'd been short-staffed all summer. Diane asked if he'd posted the video to TikTok. He admitted he had. Diane showed him a printout. The video had 48,000 views. The caption read, "Squad goals at work." There were comments. "Lifeguard life hits different. This summer vibe. Living our best." The video had been posted at 3:21 p.m., 3 minutes after I'd pulled Liam from the water. While paramedics were working on him on the pool deck, Marcus had been posting their dance video to social media. He hadn't deleted it until the next day after seeing the news coverage. The third lifeguard, Sierra Long, 18, arrived with her parents and an expensive attorney. She refused to answer most questions, invoked her Fifth Amendment rights. Her attorney said she was cooperating with the criminal investigation and wouldn't make statements that could incriminate her. That told us the DA was actually pursuing charges. The depositions of the pool director and aquatic supervisor were even more revealing. Neither could produce current certifications for the lifeguards. Neither could explain why phones weren't prohibited. Neither knew how many near drownings had occurred in previous years. The aquatic supervisor, a man named Trevor Hoskins, admitted he'd received multiple complaints about distracted lifeguards throughout the summer. He'd spoken to staff about it but hadn't enforced consequences, hadn't confiscated phones, hadn't written anyone up. He said he didn't want to be too strict because they were already having trouble keeping staff. Said if he was too harsh, the lifeguards would quit and they'd have to close the pool. The pool director, Janet Willoughby, said she'd never been informed about the complaints. Said Hoskins had authority over day-to-day operations. Said she trusted him to handle issues appropriately. When Diane showed her the incident reports about previous near drownings, she claimed she'd never seen them. Said they should have been escalated to her. Said Hoskins had failed in his duties. Everyone was blaming everyone else. Nobody was taking responsibility. The city's attorney tried to claim this showed Hoskins was a rogue employee acting against policy. Diane said it showed systematic negligence at every level. 6 months into the lawsuit, my employer called me into a meeting. I'd been on extended bereavement leave since Liam died. My boss said they'd been supportive, but it was time to discuss my return to work. I said I wasn't ready. I was dealing with the lawsuit and the criminal proceedings, and Jessica and I were barely functional. He said he understood, but they needed to know my intentions. Had received complaints from clients about uncompleted projects. Needed someone reliable in my position. I said I'd been reliable for 12 years before my son drowned. He said, of course, and he was sorry for my loss, but business realities required difficult decisions. He offered me a severance package, 3 months' salary if I resigned voluntarily. Otherwise, they'd have to terminate me for abandonment. I took the package, didn't have energy to fight, went home and told Jessica. She'd been on leave from her nursing job, too. Her hospital had been more understanding, but she couldn't go back to pediatrics. Couldn't take care of other people's children when ours was dead. She'd been looking into administrative positions. We were burning through savings. The lawsuit wouldn't pay out for years even if we won. We sold Liam's bedroom furniture, packed his clothes, couldn't afford to keep the house as a memorial when bills were piling up. The criminal case moved slower than the civil suit. The district attorney charged all 3 lifeguards with involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment. Trevor Hoskins, the aquatic supervisor, was charged with criminal negligence. They all pled not guilty. Their attorneys fought every motion, requested delays, filed appeals. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 10 months after Liam died. Jessica and I attended every court date, watched the lifeguards walk in with their families, listened to their attorneys argue they were just kids who made a mistake. that they didn't deserve to have their lives ruined, that jailing them wouldn't bring Liam back. The judge set a trial date for 6 months later. Meanwhile, the civil case continued. Diane filed motions to compel the city to turn over documents they'd been withholding. The city filed motions to dismiss. The judge denied their motions and ordered mediation. Mediation was scheduled at a neutral location downtown. We sat in one conference room. The city's representatives sat in another. A mediator shuttled between rooms. The city's first offer was $250,000. Diane didn't even bring it to me. Told them we were wasting everyone's time. The offer went to $500,000, then $750,000, then $1 million. Diane came back to our room and laid it out. She said $1 million was real money, would provide financial security, would avoid years of trial and appeals. She also said we had an extremely strong case. The video evidence was damning, the expert testimony was solid. A jury would award much more, but trials were risky, juries were unpredictable, we could lose everything. I told Diane I wanted the trial, wanted every detail exposed in public, wanted people to know exactly how badly the city had failed, wanted the lifeguards to testify under oath, wanted accountability beyond money. She said she'd tell the mediator. The city's final offer was $1.5 million. We rejected it. Diane said they'd see us in court. The civil trial was scheduled to begin 3 weeks before the criminal trial. The judge had consolidated our claims against the city, the pool, and the lifeguards. Jury selection took 2 days. Diane asked each potential juror if they'd ever lost a child, if they had teenagers, if they used social media, if they believed young people today were too distracted by phones. She wanted jurors who'd be sympathetic to us and harsh on the defendants. The city's attorney wanted jurors who'd blame me, who'd see this as a parent's negligence, not an institution's failure. We ended up with 12 jurors, mix of ages and backgrounds. Opening statements began on a Monday. Diane walked the jury through Liam's last day. The excitement about swimming, the safety precautions we'd taken, the trust we'd placed in trained professionals, the 4 minutes he'd spent underwater while lifeguards danced for social media, the frantic CPR, the hospital, the decision to remove life support. She showed the jury stills from the security video. Several jurors looked away. One woman was crying. Diane said this case was about a community pool that had betrayed its fundamental mission. That had hired undertrained staff. That had failed to enforce basic safety protocols. That had valued convenience over lives. That had caused a preventable death through negligence so gross it demanded accountability. The city's attorney argued that tragedy doesn't equal liability, that Liam's death was heartbreaking, but not the city's fault. That I'd been present and responsible for supervising my son, that the lifeguards were there to prevent emergencies in the entire pool, not watch individual children, that the city had provided trained staff and safety equipment, that what happened was a combination of unfortunate circumstances, not systematic failure. He said the jury should remember that hindsight was 20/20, that everyone at the pool that day, including me, had failed to see Liam in distress, that the lifeguards were young people who'd made a momentary poor choice but hadn't intended harm, that destroying their lives and bankrupting the city wouldn't bring Liam back. The witnesses started the next day. Diane called the paramedics who'd responded. They described Liam's condition when they arrived, described working on him for 20 minutes. Described knowing the drowning had lasted too long. Called the ER doctor who'd treated him. She explained anoxic brain injury, explained the scans showing extensive damage, explained that 4 minutes without oxygen meant death even if the heart could be restarted. Called our aquatic safety expert. He walked through every failure, the inadequate supervision, the dead zones in lifeguard positioning, the lack of phone policies, the previous near drownings that should have triggered reviews. He said Riverside Community Pool had a culture of complacency that made Liam's death inevitable. The city's attorney tried to poke holes, asked if even perfect lifeguard positioning could guarantee seeing every distressed swimmer. The expert said no, but proper scanning would have caught Liam within seconds. Asked if parents bore responsibility for watching their own children. The expert said yes, but that didn't absolve lifeguards of their duty. Asked if the previous near drownings had actually been emergencies or just kids who'd momentarily struggled before recovering. The experts said the reports weren't detailed enough to know, and that was itself a failure. Diane called me to testify on day 4. She walked me through everything, bringing Liam to the pool, setting up my laptop, looking up periodically, seeing him playing, working on my presentation, that moment of instinct when I'd looked up and not found him, finding him floating, the CPR, the hospital. The city's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, asked how often I'd looked up. Every few minutes I said. He asked what every few minutes meant. 5 minutes, 10, 15. I said I didn't time it. He asked if I'd noticed the lifeguards being distracted. I said no. He asked if I'd noticed Liam struggling. I said no. He asked if I'd been focused on my work instead of my son. I said I'd been balancing both. He showed the jury my laptop. Still had pool water damage from when I'd dropped it running to Liam. He asked if that presentation had been worth it. I said nothing was worth it. He said, "But you made a choice that day, didn't you? You chose work over watching your son." Diane objected. The judge sustained. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Diane called the 3 lifeguards next. Ashley Pruitt testified first. She admitted everything. Said she'd been on her phone all summer, said everyone did it, said Trevor Hoskins, the supervisor, had seen them and never said anything. Said the day Liam drowned, they'd decided to film a TikTok during a quiet moment. Said they'd done it dozens of times before without incident. Said it had only taken 2 minutes. Said she'd never imagined something would happen in those 2 minutes. She cried through most of her testimony. Said she thought about Liam every day. Said she was sorry. Said she'd deleted TikTok and quit lifeguarding and started therapy for the guilt. The city's attorney asked if she'd intended to neglect her duties. She said no. Asked if she'd received training. She said yes. Asked if she'd been told specifically not to film videos. She said no, not specifically. Just told to stay vigilant. Asked if 2 minutes seemed like a long time to be off her chair. She said no, it had felt like seconds. Marcus Dunn was more defensive on the stand. Said his zone hadn't included where Liam drowned. Said he'd participated in the video but wasn't responsible for that section of the pool. Said the whole thing was a freak accident. Diane shredded him, showed that lifeguards were supposed to provide overlapping coverage, that dead zones were supposed to be impossible, that leaving his chair meant his entire zone was unguarded, that another child could have drowned there while he filmed. He admitted that was true, but said it hadn't happened. Diane asked if that made it okay. He didn't answer. Sierra Long took the Fifth Amendment on most questions. Her attorney wouldn't let her testify about the filming or the incident. She only confirmed her employment dates and certification. Diane called Trevor Hoskins next. He looked terrible, hadn't shaved, suit rumpled. He admitted he'd failed in his supervisory duties, said he'd received complaints about phone use but hadn't enforced policies, said he'd been focused on keeping the pool staffed and operational, said enforcing rules would have caused people to quit, said summer employment was hard, kids didn't want to work. He'd taken whoever he could get and tried to make it work. Diane asked if that meant hiring underqualified people. He said no, everyone was certified. Diane produced their certification records, asked him to explain why Ashley Pruitt's CPR certification had expired 3 months before Liam drowned. He couldn't. Asked why Marcus Dunn's lifeguard training certificate was from a for-profit online course that took 4 hours instead of the standard 2-day in-person certification. He said, budget constraints. Diane asked if saving money was worth a child's life. He said no, of course not. Diane asked, then why had he cut corners on safety? He said he'd made mistakes, said he was sorry, said he'd resigned his position, said he couldn't sleep, said he saw Liam's face every night. The jury watched him break down. I felt nothing. Janet Willoughby, the pool director, testified that she'd been unaware of the systemic issues, that Hoskins had reported everything was fine, that she'd trusted her supervisor, that she managed multiple city facilities and couldn't personally oversee daily operations at each. Diane showed her the incident reports from previous near drownings, all marked as resolved, all signed by her. She claimed she'd signed them without reading thoroughly. Diane asked if that was responsible management. She said no. Asked if she'd resigned. She said no, she'd been reassigned within the Parks Department. Asked if she'd faced disciplinary action. She said no. Diane let that hang in the air. The city employee who'd failed to protect Liam had suffered no professional consequences. The city's defense called their own expert, a former lifeguard trainer who testified that drownings could happen even under perfect supervision, that distressed swimmers often didn't call for help, that 4 minutes without oxygen was survivable if CPR started immediately, that I'd delayed too long checking on Liam, that my failure to supervise was the proximate cause. Diane destroyed him on cross-examination, showed that his consulting firm did 80% of its business with municipalities defending against lawsuits, showed he'd testified in 6 other drowning cases always for the defense, showed he'd been paid $50,000 for his testimony in this case, asked if that affected his objectivity. He said no. The jury didn't look convinced. Closing arguments took a full day. Both sides summarized their cases. Diane focused on the video evidence, on the verified timeline showing the lifeguards abandoned their posts, on the systematic failures the city had allowed to fester, on the fact that Liam had been in 4 feet of water with 3 trained lifeguards within 30 feet and still drowned because they were making content for social media. She asked the jury to send a message that children's lives mattered more than viral videos, that cities who cut corners on safety would pay the price, that the people responsible for this tragedy would be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. The city was liable for wrongful death. The pool was negligent. The lifeguards breached their duty of care. Damages phase would begin Monday. The damages trial lasted 3 days. Diane called economists who calculated Liam's lifetime earning potential, called psychologists who testified about our emotional trauma, called Jessica, who described the hole in our lives where our son should be. The jury awarded $8.2 million, economic damages for Liam's lost future, non-economic damages for pain and suffering, punitive damages to punish the city's reckless behavior. The city's attorney immediately filed notice of appeal, said the amount was excessive, said they'd fight it. Diane said, let them. Said appeals took years, but we'd win. The criminal trials began 2 weeks later. Sierra Long took a plea deal, pled guilty to negligent homicide, received 18 months jail time with half suspended. Ashley Pruitt went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted her after 4 hours. The judge sentenced her to 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. Marcus Dunn was convicted and received 2 years. Trevor Hoskins pled guilty to criminal negligence and received a suspended sentence with 5 years probation. None of them would serve significant time. None of them would have their lives destroyed the way ours had been. But they'd been convicted, held criminally responsible. That was something. The civil judgment was upheld on appeal 18 months later. The city paid the full amount rather than continue fighting. $8.2 million after Diane's 40% fee left us with just under $5 million. More money than we'd ever imagined having. Money that meant nothing because it came from our son's death. We donated $1 million to water safety organizations, set up a foundation in Liam's name to provide free swimming lessons to low-income kids, bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood where we wouldn't drive past the pool every day. Jessica retrained as a medical researcher. I started consulting from home. We existed. That's the best word for it. We existed in this new life we hadn't chosen. The pool was permanently closed 6 months after the verdict. The city council voted to demolish it and build a memorial park instead. We attended the groundbreaking. Watched as bulldozers tore down the building where Liam had died. Watched as they filled in the pool with concrete. Felt nothing close to closure. 3 years after Liam's death, we were invited to speak at a national conference on aquatic safety. Told our story to an audience of pool operators and lifeguard trainers. Showed them the video that had been played in court. Watched them react with horror. Told them this couldn't happen again. That every pool needed strict phone policies. That supervision had to be constant. That budget constraints couldn't justify cutting safety corners. That children's lives depended on lifeguards taking their jobs seriously. Several facilities implemented new policies after hearing our presentation. Required phones to be locked in staff rooms. Installed additional cameras. Increased supervisor presence on deck. Small changes that might save lives. The teenager who'd filmed that first TikTok video, Ashley, reached out 4 years later. asked if she could meet with us. Said she'd been sober for 2 years after struggling with alcohol following the conviction. Said she'd completed her sentence and was working with at-risk youth now. Said she thought about Liam every single day. Said she wanted us to know she was trying to make something positive from the worst thing she'd ever done. Jessica said no. Said she couldn't face her. I met Ashley alone at a coffee shop. She looked older than 23, worn down. She apologized again. I told her I didn't forgive her. Told her that wasn't why I'd come. But I told her that using her experience to help others was the only meaningful thing she could do with what happened. She nodded. We talked for an hour. I never saw her again. Liam would have been 13 this year, starting 8th grade, probably still obsessed with marine biology, probably begging for a pet shark despite my explanations about why that wasn't possible. And Jessica and I visit his grave every Sunday to tell him about a world he'll never see, while 3 former lifeguards live with guilt, and a city learned the expensive lesson that viral videos cost more than just time. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.